She was screaming so loudly the entire cabin went silent. Her phone was inches from my face. "You stole my seat," she yelled. Flight attendants froze. Passengers stared. What she didn't know was this: the plane wasn't taking off until the truth came out. I'm not a confrontational person. I don't argue in public. I don't raise my voice. And I definitely don't start fights on airplanes. If anything, I do the opposite. I follow rules. I wait for my turn. I say thank you to flight attendants and try not to make anyone's job harder than it already is. Flying already makes me uneasy, and the last thing I want at 30,000 feet is unnecessary drama. That's why I paid extra for my seat. Seat 14A. Window. It wasn't about luxury. It wasn't about status. It was about control. What little control you can have when you're sealed inside a metal tube hurtling through the sky. I've had flight anxiety for as long as I can remember. Takeoff is the worst part. My mind likes to invent worst-case scenarios when the engines roar and the ground drops away. But the window helps. Watching the runway blur, seeing the clouds close in, it gives my brain something real to focus on instead of imaginary disasters. So when I booked this flight, I paid for the window without hesitation. Dallas to Chicago. 3 hours. Simple. Or at least, it was supposed to be. I arrived at the gate early, headphones in, coffee in hand, mentally preparing myself for a quiet flight. The gate area was busy but normal. Families juggling kids, business travelers glued to laptops, the usual low hum of announcements and rolling suitcases. Then I noticed her. She was impossible to miss. Loud voice, loud outfit, loud energy. She was pacing near the boarding desk, phone held high, talking to it like it was an audience instead of a screen. Every sentence sounded like a complaint. About the airline, about the delay, about the seats, about how people don't respect her time. I try not to stare. I always try to mind my own business in places like airports. Everyone's stressed. Everyone's tired. It's easier to stay invisible. But she made that difficult. She laughed too loudly. She snapped her fingers at the gate agent. At one point, she rolled her eyes and said, "Unbelievable," loud enough for half the gate to hear. Still, I didn't think much of it. I assumed she'd end up being someone else's problem. Boarding started. My group was called. I lined up, scanned my pass, and walked down the jet bridge with that familiar mix of nerves and relief. The plane smelled like recycled air and coffee. Overhead bins slammed shut. People shuffled down the aisle looking for their rows. Row 14. There it was. 14A. The window seat I'd paid for. I slid into it, tucked my backpack under the seat in front of me, and let out a slow breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I buckled my seatbelt, rested my forehead lightly against the cool window, and told myself, "You're fine. It's just another flight." For a few seconds, everything was exactly how it should be. Then I heard her voice. Sharp. Confidence. Too close. "Oh no," she said, stopping beside my row. "That's my seat." I looked up, confused at first. She was standing in the aisle, one hand on her hip, phone already angled slightly upward like it might start recording at any second. She didn't ask. She didn't check her ticket. She didn't even look uncertain. She said it like it was a fact. I calmly pulled out my boarding pass and held it up. 14A, I said. Window. She glanced at it for half a second, then scoffed. "No," she said. "I always sit by the window." That was the moment I realized this wasn't going to be simple. I didn't know yet that this seat, this small, ordinary airplane seat, was about to turn into the center of a full-blown public meltdown. And I definitely didn't know that half the cabin would soon be watching. Before she ever yelled at me on that plane, there were signs. Looking back, the red flags were everywhere. I just didn't realize they were warning flares at the time. She stood there in the aisle, blocking people behind her, staring at me like I'd personally insulted her. Her phone was still in her hand, screen lit, camera facing outward, ready. She hadn't hit a record yet, but she was prepared. That alone told me a lot. Most people don't walk through life assuming every disagreement needs to be documented. She did. "I'm gonna need you to move," she said, her tone dripping with fake patience. "I paid for that seat. I paid for this one too," I replied calmly, tapping my boarding pass again. 14A window. She let out a short laugh. Not amused, dismissive. "Yeah, well," she said, waving her hand. "The app messes up all the time. They probably double-booked it. Just switch with me. It's not a big deal." Behind her, a line of passengers was starting to form. People shifting their bags. clearing their throats, pretending not to listen while absolutely listening. I felt the pressure immediately. Airplanes are designed to make conflict uncomfortable. Narrow aisles, limited space. Everyone is trapped together. Social pressure does the rest. Most people would have given in right there. I almost did. But then I remembered why I bought the seat in the first place. I'm sorry, I said, keeping my voice level. But I'm not moving. This is my assigned seat. Her expression changed instantly. The polite mask dropped. You're being difficult, she snapped. I need the window. Need. That word again. I glanced down at her ticket for the first time. It was folded in her hand, creased like it had been angrily clenched more than once. Which seat are you assigned? I asked. She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Then she said, that doesn't matter. It mattered. I could feel eyes on us now. A man across the aisle paused mid-overhead bin struggle. A woman a row behind leaned slightly into the aisle, pretending to adjust her bag. Karen noticed the attention too, and instead of calming down, she leaned into it. She sighed loudly and said, unbelievable. I swear, airlines let anyone sit anywhere these days. Her phone rose a little higher. Still not recording, but close. At that moment, a flight attendant approached from the back of the plane, scanning rows, checking seatbelts, doing her job. Karen saw her and immediately shifted tactics. Her shoulders slumped. Her voice softened. Excuse me, she called out, loud enough to carry. I think there's been a mistake. The flight attendant stopped beside our row, professional and calm. What seems to be the issue? Karen didn't wait for me to speak. He's in my seat, she said, pointing at me. And he refuses to move. The flight attendant looked at me. I handed over my boarding pass without a word. She examined it, then turned to Karen. And your seat, ma'am? Karen handed it over reluctantly. The flight attendant glanced down. Ma'am, she said evenly, you're assigned to 14B. That's the aisle seat. Silence. Karen stared at her like she'd just been personally betrayed. No, she said. That can't be right. It is, the flight attendant replied, pointing gently. 14A is the window. 14B is the aisle. Karen's jaw tightened. I always sit by the window, she repeated, slower this time, like saying it differently might change reality. I understand, the flight attendant said, still calm. But today, that's not your assigned seat. That should have been the end of it. Most people would have sighed, apologized, and sat down. Karen wasn't most people. She turned back to me, eyes flashing. So you're really not going to move? She asked. No, I said. I'm not. That's when she raised her phone and hit records. Okay, she said loudly, angling the camera toward her face. So apparently, I'm being harassed on this flight. The word harassed landed like a slap. A few passengers gasped softly. I felt my stomach drop. Because once someone starts filming, the truth becomes optional. She pointed the camera at me. This man stole my seat, she continued. And now he's refusing to cooperate. I opened my mouth to respond, but the flight attendant held up a hand. Ma'am, she said firmly, you need to put your phone away. Karen ignored her. I'm documenting this, she said. For my safety. Her voice had changed again, shakier, rehearsed, like she was reading from a script she'd used before. And that's when I understood something important. This wasn't her first scene. This wasn't spontaneous. This was a routine. I sat there, trapped by the window, heart pounding, not from fear of flying this time, but from the realization that I was about to become the villain in someone else's story. And the plane still hadn't even finished boarding. The flight attendant stood there for a moment, clearly weighing her options. Boarding was still happening. The aisle was clogged. Bags were piling up. People were stuck behind Karen, forced to watch the standoff like it was an unplanned episode of reality TV. Ma'am, the flight attendant said again, firmer now. You need to step aside so passengers can board. Karen lowered her phone just enough to roll her eyes. Unreal, she muttered, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. This airline has zero respect for paying customers. She finally slid into 14B, the aisle seat she'd been assigned, but she did it with theatrical exaggeration, throwing her purse down, crossing her arms, angling her body away from me like she'd been wronged. I thought that was it. I really did. I told myself she'd cool off, that the drama would end as quickly as it started. I stared out the window, focusing on the wing, the ground crew moving with practiced efficiency, anything to avoid eye contact. For about 30 seconds, the cabin returned to its normal rhythm. Then Karen leaned toward me. I hope you're happy, she said under her breath. I didn't respond. That irritated her more. You know, she continued, some people actually need the window. It's not just about comfort. It's about accessibility. The implication was clear. She was laying the groundwork. I paid for this seat, I said quietly. So did you. We just paid for different ones. She scoffed. Wow, empathy really is dead. Her phone came back up. Not fully, not obvious, but I could see the screen glowing in my peripheral vision. She wasn't done. The plane filled up around us. Overhead bins slammed shut. Flight attendants called out final boarding instructions. A child cried somewhere behind us. The air felt thicker, heavier. Karen started narrating, soft enough to sound like she wasn't talking to anyone, loud enough for people to hear. Some guy took my window seat, she said. Refuses to move. Flight attendants won't help. Typical. A man across the aisle frowned. The woman behind us shifted uncomfortably. I felt my face heat up. I hate being the center of attention. I hate feeling judged by strangers who only have half the story. And Karen knew that. She was counting on it. Ma'am, the flight attendant returned, her patience visibly thinning. Your phone needs to be put away. Karen smiled without warmth. I'm just texting, she said, even though the camera was clearly on. The flight attendant held her gaze. Please. Karen complied, barely. She lowered the phone to her lap. The moment the attendant walked away, she turned it back on. I saw my own reflection in the dark window. Jaw clenched, shoulders stiff. This wasn't just uncomfortable anymore. It felt deliberate. The captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming everyone aboard and reminding us to buckle up for departure. The seatbelt sign chimed on. Karen sighed loudly. Oh, perfect, she said. Now I'm trapped next to him. I said nothing. But inside, something shifted. I realized she wasn't looking for the window seat anymore. She was looking for a reaction. She wanted me to snap, to raise my voice, to give her something she could point to and say, see, this is who he really is. So I stayed still. I breathed. I followed the rules. That, apparently, was unacceptable. As the plane began to taxi, Karen suddenly pressed the call button. Once, twice, 3 times. A different flight attendant approached. Yes, ma'am. I was harassed during boarding, Karen said immediately. And I feel unsafe. The word unsafe again. The flight attendant glanced between us. What happened? Karen launched into a story that sounded nothing like reality. She claimed I'd raised my voice, claimed I'd invaded her space, claimed she'd tried to resolve things calmly. I listened, stunned, as she rewrote the last 10 minutes in real time. When the attendant turned to me, I simply handed over my boarding pass again. I haven't said anything, I said. I'm just sitting in my assigned seat. The flight attendant nodded slowly. Ma'am, she said to Karen, there's no violation here. He's in his seat. Karen's eyes flashed. So that's it, she snapped. You're just going to ignore me? No, the attendant replied evenly. I'm asking you to comply with crew instructions. Karen leaned back, arms crossed tight. I guess we'll see about that. Those words sent a chill through me. Because they weren't complaining. They were a threat. The plane slowed, then stopped. The engines idled. We weren't taking off yet. And suddenly, everyone knew it. Murmurs rippled through the cabin. People checked their watches. Someone muttered under their breath. Karen looked around, realized she had an audience again, and smiled. That was when she did something I never expected. She stood up, while the seatbelt sign was still on, and everything went from tense to dangerous. It wasn't loud at first. It was worse than that. It was tense. Ma'am, a flight attendant called from the front. Please take your seat. Karen ignored her. She stepped fully into the aisle, blocking it completely, one hand braced against the seat back in front of her. Her phone was up again now, no pretending anymore. The camera was pointed straight at her face. I want this on record, she said loudly. I'm being targeted. A collective groan moved through the cabin like a wave. Ma'am, the seatbelt sign is on, the flight attendant said, approaching quickly. You need to sit down immediately. Karen laughed. Not nervous laughter. Not embarrassed laughter. Mocking laughter. Wow, she said to her phone. Did you hear that? I'm being ordered to sit next to someone who made me feel unsafe. Heads turned. People were watching openly now. I felt my pulse in my ears. Please, the flight attendant said, lowering her voice but sharpening it at the same time. This is not optional. Karen spun toward me, phone still recording. Tell them, she snapped. Tell them what you did. I blinked. I didn't do anything. I said, keeping my voice even. There, she shouted, pointing at me. That tone, that attitude, that's exactly what I'm talking about. The accusation hit harder because it was so absurd. A man across the aisle shook his head. Someone behind me muttered, "Unbelievable." Karen heard it. She thrived on it. "You see," she said, sweeping the camera around the cabin. "Hostile environment. And nobody cares." The flight attendant stepped closer, now clearly done playing nice. "Ma'am, if you do not sit down immediately, we will have to stop boarding and contact the captain." Karen smiled wider. "Good," she said. "Let's do that." The plane went silent. You could feel it. 200 people realizing their day was about to be delayed because one person refused to follow a basic rule. The flight attendant paused, then nodded once. "Okay," she said. "Please remain where you are." She turned and walked briskly toward the front of the plane. Karen looked around like she'd just won something. "There we go," she said to her phone. Accountability. The engines shut down completely. That sound, the sudden absence of noise, made everything feel heavier. People exhaled sharply. Someone swore under their breath. Karen stayed standing, filming, smiling. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are pausing departure due to a cabin issue. Please remain seated." A ripple of irritation spread instantly. Karen clapped once. "Perfect," she said. "Now we can sort this out." The captain didn't come back right away. Instead, 2 flight attendants returned, one from the front, one from the back. They positioned themselves on either side of Karen, forming a quiet barrier. "Ma'am," the senior attendant said, "this is your final warning. You must sit down." Karen tilted her head. "Or what?" she asked. The question hung there. That's when she made her biggest mistake. She stepped closer to me. Too close. Her arm brushed mine, deliberately. "There," she said loudly. "Did you see that? He just touched me." I froze. "I didn't move," I said. "Don't gaslight me," she snapped. "You're on camera." She thrust the phone inches from my face. I leaned back instinctively, pressed into the window, trapped. "Ma'am," the attendant said sharply, "back away now." Karen didn't. Instead, she raised her voice. "This man is harassing me," she yelled. "And I don't feel safe sitting next to him." The word safe again. It was her favorite weapon. A woman a few rows up spoke up. "I've been watching this the whole time," she said. "He hasn't done anything." Karen whipped her head around. "Stay out of it," she screamed. The woman recoiled. That was it. The senior flight attendant's voice dropped into something cold and unmistakably serious. "Ma'am, sit down. Now." Karen laughed again. "No." The attendant turned and lifted the intercom phone. "Captain," she said calmly, "we have a non-compliant passenger in row 14 refusing crew instructions and obstructing the aisle." Karen's smile faltered for the first time. "Whoa, let's not be dramatic," she said quickly. "I'm just asking questions." "You were given clear instructions," the attendant replied. "You chose not to follow them." Karen's eyes darted around. She was still filming, but now the performance had changed. This wasn't a confident outrage anymore. This was damage control. "Everyone's overreacting," she said to her phone. "I'm being bullied." The captain's voice came back on. "Ma'am, in row 14, you are interfering with flight operations. You must comply with crew instructions immediately." That did it. Karen snapped. She slammed her hand down on the armrest. "This is discrimination," she yelled. "You're all against me because I spoke up." Her voice cracked, not from emotion, but from losing control. The flight attendant took a step back and said something quietly into her radio. I didn't hear the words, but the effect was immediate. From a row behind us, a man stood up. Big, calm, solid. He hadn't said a word the entire flight. Until now. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "you need to stop." Karen spun around. "And who are you?" she demanded. The man reached into his jacket, pulled out a badge, and flipped it open. "Off-duty law enforcement," he said. "Sit down." The cabin froze. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since boarding, she had nothing to say. Her phone lowered slowly. Her shoulders sagged. And just like that, the entire story flipped. The badge changed everything. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't dramatic. It was just final. The man held it steady, his voice calm but immovable. "Sit down." Karen stared at him like her brain was struggling to catch up. The confidence she'd been riding for the last 20 minutes vanished in an instant. She started, then stopped. For the first time since boarding, She looked unsure. The senior flight attendant didn't waste the moment. "Ma'am," she said, "you are now required to return to your seat immediately." Karen glanced around the cabin. No one was on her side anymore. No sympathetic faces. No silent agreement. Just 200 exhausted passengers who wanted this to be over. Slowly, very slowly, Karen lowered herself back into seat 14B. The off-duty officer remained standing for a moment, watching her carefully, then nodded once to the flight attendant and returned to his seat. The cabin exhaled, but it wasn't over. Karen buckled her seatbelt with shaking hands, then immediately reached for her phone again. The flight attendant saw it. "No," she said firmly. "Turn it off. I'm allowed to document." "No," the attendant repeated, sharper now. "You are not." Karen hesitated. Then, with exaggerated annoyance, she set the phone face down on her lap. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are addressing the situation and will update you shortly." The engines remained silent. That silence was deliberate. Karen noticed. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice suddenly small. The flight attendant leaned closer, lowering her voice so only Karen and I could hear. "You've been reported for refusing crew instructions, standing during taxi, and making false accusations against another passenger," she said evenly. "The captain is deciding next steps." Karen swallowed. "I didn't do anything wrong," she whispered. The flight attendant straightened. "You were warned multiple times," she said. "This is the result of your choices." Karen shook her head slowly, like denial might undo the last half hour. "This is insane," she muttered. "I just wanted my seat." I looked at her then. Really looked at her. Her makeup was smudged. Her hands trembled. The woman who'd been yelling minutes earlier now looked small. The flight attendant turned to me. "Sir," she said quietly, "are you okay?" I nodded. "Yes," I said. "I just want to get home." She gave a brief, sympathetic smile. "I'm sorry this happened," she said. "You did nothing wrong." That mattered more than I expected. The flight attendant stepped away and spoke to the captain again. Minutes passed. No one talked. No one moved. The entire cabin was locked in that strange, suspended state where everyone knows something big is coming. Then the captain spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said calmly, "we will be returning to the gate. Please remain seated." A wave of reaction rippled through the plane. Groans. Sighs. Someone whispered, "You've got to be kidding me." Karen stiffened. "Returning to the gate?" she asked sharply. "Why?" The flight attendant didn't look at her. "Because of you," someone behind us muttered. Karen's head snapped around. "Excuse me." No one answered. The engines roared back to life. Not for takeoff, but for reversal. The plane began to move backward. Karen's breathing quickened. "You can't do this," she said louder now. "I paid for this flight." "So did everyone else," the man across the aisle replied flatly. Karen turned forward again, panic creeping into her voice. "This is unbelievable," she said. "All because I spoke up." The plane slowly made its way back to the gate. No one filmed now. No one smiled. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was the consequence. When the plane finally stopped, the seatbelt sign remained on. The cabin door did not open. Instead, two uniformed figures appeared in the window of the cockpit. Law enforcement. Karen saw them. Her face was drained of color. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." The captain's voice returned one last time. "Ma'am, in row 14, please remain seated. Officers will be boarding shortly." Karen turned toward me. "This is your fault," she hissed. "If you had just moved." "No," I said calmly. "This happened because you wouldn't sit down." She stared at me, eyes wide, like she genuinely couldn't process that answer. The cabin door opened. Two officers stepped onto the plane. The flight attendant met them and quietly gestured down the aisle. "Row 14. Our row." I followed them. The officers stopped beside Karen. "Ma'am," one said professionally, "we need you to come with us." Karen didn't move. "I didn't do anything," she said weakly. "You were reported for interfering with flight operations and refusing crew instructions," the officer replied. "Please stand up." Her hands shook as she unbuckled her seatbelt. She stood. And just like that, the screaming Karen who had stormed onto this plane was gone. In her place stood someone silent, pale, and terrified. As they led her up the aisle, no one said a word. No boos. No cheers. Just quiet. Because everyone knew. This was the moment she didn't expect. Karen didn't scream as they walked her up the aisle. That surprised me. She didn't argue, didn't cry, didn't demand a manager. She just walked, head down, the phone clutched uselessly in her hand. The officers didn't rush her. They didn't need to. The fight had drained out of her completely. As they passed each row, people leaned back slightly, instinctively creating space, as if whatever chaos she'd carried with her might still be contagious. No one made eye contact. When she reached the front of the plane, she stopped. "Can I at least get my bag?" she asked quietly. The officer nodded. One of the flight attendants retrieved her carry-on from the overhead bin. Karen took it with trembling hands. Then, before stepping off the plane, she turned around. For a split second, I thought she might say something. Apologize. Explain. Blame. She did none of those things. She just looked. At the cabin. At the people. At the consequences. Then she disappeared through the open door. The moment she was gone, something strange happened. The plane breathed again. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. People shifted in their seats. Shoulders relaxed. A few quiet conversations restarted. Someone laughed softly, not at her, but out of relief. The door closed. The officer stepped off. The jet bridge pulled away. And just like that, it was over. The captain came on the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "thank you for your patience. We apologize for the delay. We'll be departing shortly." A ripple of applause moved through the cabin. Not loud, not celebratory, grateful. The engines powered up properly this time. As the plane taxied back toward the runway, a flight attendant stopped beside my seat. "Sir," she said quietly, "are you okay?" "Yes," I replied. "Thank you." She nodded. "I'm sorry you were put in that situation," she said. "You handled it well." That meant more than she probably realized. She moved on. The man across the aisle leaned toward me. "Nice job staying calm," he said. "Most people would have lost it." I shrugged. "I just wanted to get home." He smiled. "Yeah," he said. "We all did." As the plane took off, my usual anxiety didn't hit. I watched the ground fall away through the window, my window, and for the first time that day, I felt steady. Not because of the seat, because of what had happened, because I'd learned something I didn't expect to learn on a random flight. That staying calm isn't a weakness. It's power. 3 hours later, we landed in Chicago. People gathered their bags, filed into the aisle, and prepared to leave like any other flight. But there was a difference now, a quiet connection. As I stood and pulled my backpack from under the seat, a woman a few rows up caught my eye and nodded. The off-duty officer passed by. "Glad that worked out," he said. "Me too," I replied. When I stepped into the terminal, the noise and motion of the airport rushed back in. Announcements. Footsteps. Rolling suitcases. Life is moving forward. I checked my phone. No viral video. No online outrage. No twisted version of events. Just silence. And I was grateful for that. Because some stories don't need an audience. They just need to end right. As I walked toward baggage claim, I thought about Karen. About how quickly confidence can turn into panic. How entitlement collapses under authority. How small choices spiral into big consequences. And I realized something else. She hadn't expected what happened next. But neither had I. Not because it was dramatic. Not because it went viral. But because it revealed something most people don't realize until they're forced to live it. Conflict doesn't start when someone yells. It starts when someone believes the rules don't apply to them. Karen didn't wake up that morning planning to get removed from a flight. She probably thought she was standing up for herself. Thought she was assertive. I thought she was right. But somewhere along the way, standing up turned into standing over everyone else. And that's where things went wrong. She assumed pressure would make me move. She assumed noise would make staff fold. She assumed a phone camera would protect her from consequences. She was wrong on all three. What surprised me most wasn't how fast authority stepped in. It was how fast the entire illusion collapsed once it did. All the shouting, all the confidence, all the performances, gone. Because real authority doesn't need to raise its voice. It just enforces reality. That day taught me something important, something I think about whenever I'm tempted to argue, prove a point, or demand my way. Calm people don't lose control. People who lose control lose everything else with it. I didn't win that situation by being smarter or stronger or louder. I won by not playing the game at all, by staying seated, by following the rules, by letting the truth stand on its own. And that's not just about airplanes. That's about life. There will always be someone who thinks their inconvenience matters more than your rights. Someone who believes volume equals power. Someone who assumes intimidation works. Most of the time, they get away with it. Until they don't. Because the truth is simple. Rules protect everyone. Until someone decides they're optional. That day, the rules protected me. And they protected every other passenger who just wanted to get where they were going in peace. As I left the airport, I felt something I didn't expect. Not satisfied. Closure. Because the story didn't end with shouting or revenge or humiliation. It ended with balance being restored. And sometimes, that's the most satisfying ending of all. So if you ever find yourself in a situation where someone is screaming for control, remember this. You don't have to match their energy. You don't have to argue your worth. You don't have to give up your seat. Just stay where you are. The truth has a way of arriving, right on time.